with any human being, if you don't take the time to peel back your biases, your prejudices, your assumptions, and ask and wonder, who is this person at the core? You do yourself a great disservice as well as them, because then you never really get to know the beauty of another human being.
Welcome to our latest Book Reporter Talks to interview. Our guest today is Shelley Read, and we're going to be talking about her debut novel, Go as a River, which has sold into 30 countries. It's been one of the most anticipated books of the year. It's an Indie Next Books pick for March, and it is a Book Reporter Bets On selection. I love this book. I've spent a lot of time in the part of Colorado that Shelley writes about. In fact, I met my husband in that area, and he was also from New Jersey. So the fact that I go to Colorado to meet the guy from New Jersey that I never would have met if I didn't go to Colorado. And I also almost took a job as the marketing director of the Crested Butte Ski Resort. And the town where Crested Butte is where Shelley lives and where she had her launch event a couple of nights ago. And people told me it was like a killer event. The publisher said everybody in the town was so vested in doing this event. So I always have to say a part of my heart stays in that part of Colorado. And it brings me so much joy to be bringing you a book that is set there as well, because I feel like it's taking me home when I'm sitting reading this book. I think in another life, I lived out West. I honestly and truly did. So what Shelley brings is so much of what is special to this beautiful book. So on that note, welcome, Shelley. So nice to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
So let's start out with you telling us about Go as a River.
Yeah, sure. So Go as a River is the story of a young woman named Victoria Nash. She's 17 years old in 1948 when the novel opens. It's the story of her growing up along the banks of the wild Gunnison River in Gunnison County, which is on the western slope of the Colorado Rockies. Victoria is fairly naive to the ways of the world. She has had to take over her mother's role of domesticity and caretaker of the farm and the men in her family after her mother's death. She is someone who is not very worldly. And yet at the beginning of the book, right away, first sentences, she meets a young man named Wilson Moon. And from that meeting evolves the challenges and the circumstances that propel Victoria into the world in a real way. And the rest of the book follows her path toward discovering her own strength and resilience and discovering herself in a deep and profound way. It's very rooted in the natural world and all that can teach us. It's about home and family and where to turn when those things are lost. And it goes with Victoria until 1971. So we follow her through her journey of becoming herself, discovering her strength and resilience by meeting the challenges in her life. So I think that's in a nutshell.
That's it in a nutshell, for sure, for sure. You know, Victoria's this character I fell in love with right from the start, and readers can sense something about her from the first pages. Did the book always start with her walking down the street, following this boy that she obviously has an interest in? Did it always start with that walk down the street? Because it's this beautiful walk into the story.
Yeah, oh, that's so true. Well, in terms of my narrative process in writing this book, I did it in a very nonlinear way. We can talk about the way in which the book originally evolved, but this was definitely not a project that I sat down with an opening scene and then wrote from there. I actually wrote it very sporadically. So I actually started kind of in the middle, and then I would envision here and here. And it was actually over many years that the story came together piece by piece. I actually ended up putting it together like a big puzzle. But once I understood who Victoria was, and I started envisioning what her setting and what her situation was, and I started envisioning the character of Wilson Moon, who I love, that that opening scene that you're speaking of, it just seemed the absolute perfect place to begin, because I'm one of the things I'm really fascinated by in life and also in narrative is happenstance and the endless possibilities when two human beings come together, or even the happenstance in our life where we're just going along normal, thinking everything is going this way, and suddenly it takes a tremendous curve or a detour that we could never have anticipated. And often, it's with great joy, it brings great joy, it brings great tragedy, but often it's those unanticipated curves in our lives that really define our journeys and who we are. And so I envisioned that for Victoria, and that's why I started the book right there. A happenstance moment that changes everything.
Yeah. And just this walk down the street, it's following him. It's just this beautiful moment. So she's the only woman in this house of men. And while she toils away for them, she has her eye always on something beyond. Like, she doesn't have her eye on what her mother did. She doesn't have her eye on what her aunt did, but something beyond. What influenced her character of this girl who's kind of stuck? But usually when people are stuck, they can't see a way forward. And she did.
Yeah, it takes her a while to do that, and the happenstance of meeting Wilson Moon is really a turning point for Victoria. The inspiration for Victoria isn't from any one person that I know specifically, but in her is rooted a lot of what I think about what it means to be a woman in the world, and how so frequently, certainly in Victoria's time, but I think in all times, it is often sadly very true that as a woman, especially a young woman, is seeking to define herself and seeking to understand her place in the world, that position and those possibilities are defined for her. Victoria takes on her mother's domestic roles when her mother dies. We learn that her mother has died right away early in the book. Victoria didn't have a choice. She was expected to just step into that role at only 12 years old. She's a very kind of timid and obedient person at first. She doesn't have a sense of herself outside of the definition that's been given to her. And I think that can be true for a lot of women of her era. But I think women everywhere, we have to fight a little bit harder sometimes for our identity and to be who we truly are in the world, as opposed to who we're quote unquote supposed to be. So I wanted to investigate that with Victoria. And then also, her character is based on the ranchers that I've known in this community here in Gunnison County. I'm surrounded by generational ranchers and farmers in the valley, and also I'm a fifth generation Coloradoan, so I'm very, very rooted in this place as well. And my ancestors were all farmers and ranchers on the eastern plains of Colorado. They were actually homesteaders. My great grandparents are homesteaders out in eastern Colorado, and I just sort of know and admire this type of person. They're humble yet very strong. They're rather stoic, and yet there's a resilience and an ability to just stand up every day and do what needs to be done that I really, really admire. So I tried to pour both of those concerns into Victoria's character.
Yeah, and it's also the elements can come on at any moment and change what's going on in your life, what's going on. And there's the elements of nature that are around you all the time as well.
Yeah.
What you've also got drawn is the prejudice against the tribal Indians is clear in these early pages. And we get to know a little about Will, but we quickly see that while she feels a spark in him, that spark is going to be fire. Like, it's going to blow up like really, really quickly. And she seems oblivious at the beginning to him being different. Is that her innocence, or is it just he was just somebody she just saw and didn't think twice about?
Yeah. Well, I really wanted to explore in the coming together of the two characters of Will and Victoria. First of all, I wanted to explore two different experiences of displacement. So at the beginning of the novel, Victoria has not yet been displaced from the town of Iola. The progress towards the dam has not yet happened. But eventually we learn that about her and how she's going to respond to that, and how all of the people of Iola are displaced from their ancestral land, which again actually happened here in the valley. But of course, I couldn't tell a story about displacement in the American West without including on whatever level I was able, the indigenous experience, because as tragic as it was for the ancestral ranchers to be displaced from the Iola area, of course, previous to that, it was the indigenous population of the valley who was so violently displaced previous. And so Will is a character who ancestrally had been displaced, had also been displaced again from his reservation, taken from his family, put in one of those hideous Indian boarding schools. I don't really go deeply into Will's background, but I did want to acknowledge that and that generational pain of displacement. And then again, with these horrible Indian boarding schools that were so prevalent in the West and the Midwest throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. I mean, the last boarding school of this type was closed in 1977. So it was well into the 20th century where this displacement, this secondary displacement. And then what often happened with a character like Will is that he became placeless. He was sort of, these boarding schools were sort of created to create, quote unquote, sort of good little white kids out of indigenous children. And so he escapes from one of those boarding schools. He's too white to return to his reservation, but he's too indigenous to be able to fit in a white community with prejudice in 1948. And I just wanted to tell that story to the degree that I was able. The cultural differences prevent me from really telling it in full, do it as respectfully as possible. And I only see Will through Victoria's lens. So these two characters work off of each other, in that way of what is possible for each one of them in the face of displacement. But as you say, they come together sort of human heart to human heart, as opposed to being biased by the typical stereotypes of the time, and of course, even still today. And I wanted to explore in those characters, what would it be like if we could be transcendent of those biases and those prejudices, and instead just see another human being as another human being who's beautiful and kind, and look past all of the differences that we're told are supposed to keep us separate. Victoria and Will are able to do that, and there are other townsfolk in the story who are able to do that. But there are, of course, and sadly, certain members of the community who can only see Will as someone who's different and evil because they've been culturally trained to see through that lens.
And I think culturally trained is a really good way because it's a lot of what's happened in this country is people have been culturally trained of this is the way you behave around people who are different from you. It really, really is. I'm not going to try to spoil the story here because there's so much for people to discover. It's a slim book, but there's so much packed into it. But Victoria leaves at one point and she heads off to the woods and she spends a lot of time there. And tell us about your love of the outdoors and how you've spent time off the grid yourself, because you clearly understand this way of just being by yourself with nature and being by yourself out there.
Oh, yeah. I love it. If I had to say, my favorite thing in the world is to be in a wild landscape, maybe preferably with my husband and my kids, but second on the list is by myself. I adore being in a wild landscape by myself. There is something so incredibly real and grounding, authentic, humbling, empowering, all of the things that root us in what is real and actual and true in the world. I just feel when I'm in a wild landscape that all of the petty concerns melt away. I often say it's like it's suddenly, you experience time in a geological way, where you realize that our daily concerns are folly as human beings is sort of a blink of an eye. It just is instant perspective for me. And also just, I'm so grateful to be surrounded by so much beauty in my life. I crave that beauty, and I define beauty really broadly. It's not the typical pastoral landscape that one might think is beautiful. I find beauty in all sorts of different layers, all sorts of different aspects of the wild of the wild landscape. And so, and honestly, the wilder, the higher in elevation, the better. I love to climb big mountains, and there's something just so enriching about that experience for me. And so it was not necessarily planned ahead of time, but once I got Victoria into the wilderness, that was actually the smoothest and easiest part of writing this book.
Yeah.
When I am in the wilderness, I have always, all the way back as long as I can remember, I always have a journal with me. And I love to write about my observations of the natural world. I think it encourages me to tune in to the minutia and some of the things that you might otherwise just walk past. And so I've been doing that my whole life. And so once I got into the groove of writing that part of Victoria's story, it felt so natural and real to me. And I wrote actually a lot of that section of the novel actually in the wilderness where it is set. And that was a great joy. And it was also wonderful to place her in that wilderness setting, very frightened at first, and then help her come around to, there's a line eventually where she says, I realized I have never been less afraid in my life. And I had to move her there. And I also wanted to say that because when I'm in a wild landscape, that is where I am least afraid of anything. And again, back to those cultural biases, the ways in which we're trained culturally to think that woods and forests are scary. To me, they're the safest place in the world. And they're just the only place that makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like at the start she feels adventuresome, then she feels fear, and then this love of the land will be of what it will give and take from her. And I love the part where the mother deer comes out with the little baby deer, and then there's the little crippled deer, and it's like the circle of life, like what is going to happen. And she sees them later on, and there's two, not three. And it's what you can observe if you're out there paying attention. We live in a part of Western New Jersey where there's a lot of deer that come around. Like we have a large fence where I could not have any flowers whatsoever. And
yeah,
I saw them all, it was like 10 of them sitting outside the fence in the back. And I'm like, you're not getting in. Like, no. That's like train, like not to go around that area. But it's so funny because you see that and you see them as something who's going to eat all the flowers, or you see them as something you're going to hit with a car and it's going to be a problem. And then you realize, well, wait a second, we're all have to be coexisting. How are we going to do that? You better drive slowly at night, and you better have a hot you want flowers because it's their land too. Like, end of discussion. But I feel like she's like the land and the weather are what's going to rule her life out there. The land and what it can produce, what she's trying to grow, how it doesn't work or does work. And I'm trying not to give anything away because there's this whole
I know it's hard.
you know what I'm doing, right? But by the same token, I feel like she's feeling empowered by trying to grow in the land, and she's feeling empowered by trying to do the things that she's doing.
And I like how you're saying, she feels adventurous and then she feels scared. I tried to develop Victoria's character almost in a 2 steps forward, 1 step back sort of trajectory, because I feel like that's been true for my own life. I think that's a much more common way to grow than we think we're supposed to. The reality is we're constantly learning. The reality is we're constantly being challenged by new and unanticipated experiences in our life. And we might gather up strength and understanding in one circumstance that ideally we would carry into the next challenge or circumstance. And my experience is sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. Or the difference in the next challenge or loss or whatever it is that we're facing requires new types of resilience. And so I thought it was correct for Victoria's character because she does start off rather naive, she lacks self-awareness. As she grows, I hope it's empowering to the reader to see that she grows and learns and then falters, and then grows, learns, and then falters, because I think that's how we all grow. There's also a line in the book kind of towards the end where she's sitting in a wild landscape, and the wild landscapes in various ways, and also the peach orchard and the rivers, function as metaphor throughout the book. And a lot of what Victoria learns about layers of life and death and grief and loss and faltering and growing, it's all right there in the wild landscape that she can observe. And I think at one point she says, we're all one and all alike in the way that we grow, peace up again. You see that all over wild landscapes in the way in which a forest grows.
Mhm.
And she learns a lot from that experience, as have I.
Yeah. And you're walking sometimes and a place will look one way and you'll go back the next year and it'll look different. And you'll go in and say, but I was expecting
Very
it
true.
to be this. And then it's not. And did that
Yeah.
bring you more joy or less joy? What ended up happening? What's your takeaway from the place? And I'm thinking of this after these terrible forest fires, after this terrible ruinations going on. And then you go back to those areas. What is it? What do you still have your takeaway there? What is still
Yeah.
bringing joy to you or memory for you there of what's happened? Because what's changed so much is everything is not the way it always was and seems. And we're going to talk about what Iola and what ends up happening there, and then what happens later on there as well. And I think what you're bringing out a lot is this woman has this resilience no matter what she's up against, and she's learning that as she goes. And I think that when we start out, we have this trajectory of you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to get married, you're going to have children, you're going to do this, do this, do this, do this. And then sometimes this comes before that. And people just, how did that happen? I think the last 3 years we couldn't go anyplace. Like what happened when, that happened? And I think we're seeing a lot of that going on right now of what do I really want out of my life? And we talk about so many places have changed over the last couple of years. And what has it really been changed? It's either people have aged out from where they were living and moved someplace else, or people said, I don't want to live where I am. I want to go to a place where there's more wildness and there's more emptiness. And I think that that's a lot of what we were talking before about what you're seeing in your town, but I think it's what we're seeing every place. Like, what do I really want to do with my life? Am I?
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that we'd have to have something as profoundly life altering as the pandemic to create space in our lives and make those different choices. I think what you're saying about how we're taught that you're supposed to do this, then this, then this. I think that's just cruel, because I think it leaves so many people thinking that they've failed in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer, and I tell my children this all the time. I don't really believe at all in the concept of failure. I think every single experience, if you show up, you give it your best. Victoria talks about this quite a bit. You just show up, you try. Sometimes you falter, but if you've learned, it is certainly not a failure. And I think we're sort of set up to think of our lives as needing to be one way or another, and then feeling disappointed on some level. But I'm a big advocate of you grow through what you go through, right? You grow through what you go through. And why else are we here? We're here to love each other and be kind and to experience and to move into our best selves, however that may be. So certainly I've learned a lot about change through wild landscapes. It's a constant setting of change. You mentioned how the storms can swoop in at this elevation in Colorado. I live at 9,000 feet every day of my life, where I climb, and it's 10, 12, up to 14,000 feet. We have 54 14,000 foot peaks here in Colorado. I've climbed almost all of them, not quite. I love it. I love it so much. And at these elevations and with this level of wilderness, it really becomes embedded in your understanding of existence that life is all about change. The landscapes, the weather, anything could happen at any moment. And it's more about your resilience and your ability to stand back up after you've been smacked down.
Yeah. It's like, if this isn't going to work, what am I going to do next? And, I think there are two other powerful characters, because Victoria gets powerful as the book goes on. She doesn't start out that way, but there are two other powerful. And let's start with Ruby Alice, who is this woman who's really a recluse, but she's this recluse who takes care of people. And she sees people who are damaged like little birds and wants to take care of them and make them be better. Yet she is a person that is dismissed as different, as wrong, let's say, like wrong, as the crazy lady, all these kinds of things. But yet she's the one that envelops the people that are hurt and damaged and makes them whole again.
Thank you. The other misfits, in a way. I envisioned Ruby Alice as I think a couple things. One, as a parallel to Will in some ways, as a character who doesn't fit into expectation, and thus people kind of just don't know what to do with her. And again, because the town of Iola was a real town, and the people who lived in Iola were real people, and some of them actually still live here in the Gunnison Valley, I wanted to be very respectful of the people of Iola, and I also didn't want to oversimplify or be stereotypical about any place has a variety of types of people. And so it wasn't so much that Rubiales was, or Will, was the focus of like active prejudice for most of the people. It was more how many of us might feel with someone who's different and we don't understand them. For a lot of Rubiales's and Will's time in the novel, they're sort of tolerated or ignored in a way. But so they're parallel characters in that way. They find solace in each other. I like how you see in Rubiales that she has actually this incredibly kind heart, but this heart is broken. We find out a little bit later why Rubiales is as odd as she is, and it's all because of grief. And grief and loss plays a pretty significant role in this book. I've certainly had my fair share of grief and loss in my life, actually pretty profoundly while I was writing this novel. And I think grief and loss then came in a little bit more strongly than it would have otherwise. But I think it makes for a richer narrative, because what I always say is, I'm carrying grief, you're carrying grief. Every human that you're going to meet on the street either is carrying grief or they will. And it seems to me that that should be a really profound point of human connection. And I think that both Rubiales and Victoria end up really connecting on that level. And I'm glad you like that. I'm glad you like that character, because I love her and I feel her. I feel her pain. I think she's another example of, if you don't take the time, like you were saying earlier with Will, with any human being, if you don't take the time to peel back your biases, your prejudices, your assumptions, and ask and wonder, who is this person at the core? You do yourself a great disservice as well as them, because then you never really get to know the beauty of another human being. And Rubiales's beauty is in there. You just have to dig for it a little bit.
What you were talking about before too is we have these expectations of what people are going to do. And I think that we start with kids when they're little about college. College is the expectation. Going to And I tell you something, there are kids that I think by the time they get out of college, they're like, okay, I did it. I did what I was supposed to do since I was 4 years old. And I often, my kids are both out of college for a while now, but people will come up to me and say, my son got into blah, blah, blah. And I want to say, let me know about sophomore year, because I so many people whose kids change and then they feel they need to apologize because this one thing that we've been trying to make work all these years, it didn't work. And then everybody gets out. What kind of a job did they get? What is their pinnacle of this? And I feel like we rather have exhausted these kids by the time they get to this, because they didn't have the kind of growing up that I did, that you just played. It's always been go to this class or go to this. You're like writing the resume when you're 4. And I feel like when I was looking at the characters in this book and that time period, it was just different. Like how you saw success or how you felt failure. Failure, you might feel a lot more because it was a lot harder life of what was going on. But success, you feel quite differently too. Am I on to
something? So true. Yeah. That's so true. I think that probably stemmed from, I was the first away from college, and yet I come from this long line of brilliant, talented, determined women. But it just wasn't encouraged in them. And so, Victoria doesn't even go to high school. At one point, she says, she would have had to go to Gunnison to go to high school, and she never saw the point. And so in one way, you think how limiting is that? Wow, she never had those opportunities. But on the other hand, as you're saying, of that era, it wasn't, so much of her domestic life was defined for her, but her path of success or failure was not defined for her. And, I have 2 children. My daughter just finished her master's degree. My son is a sophomore at the University of Colorado. And I was a crazy overachiever as a young person and as a student. So well, you were, I'm sure a lot of people listening to that. I often say I'm a recovering overachiever.
Yes.
Because as much as it served me in life in a lot of ways, it also was a disservice to me in a lot of ways as well, because you become attached to those external measurements of success or happiness or whatever. It took me a lot of time to kind of train that out of me and myself somewhere more authentic. And so I always tried to do that for my children from the beginning. I always told them, I am going to celebrate you as much for what you choose not to do as for what you do, and yet I still have these pretty high achieving kids. And so I'm always checking in with them, like, is this a good fit for you? Is this what you are really wanting? Or even if it's a means to an end, can you tolerate it? Can you step into this with joy and ride it out until you get to that end? I wish more young people would check in on their mental, emotional well-being in that way, because I think what Victoria shows us, and what I've always taught my students as well, is that it's our jobs to define our own lives. And any other route is just going to end up in pain and frustration. And then a lot of people come around to this revelation when they're 50 or 60 years old. But wouldn't it be nice to not have to wait that long?
When I first started this company, it was, how big are you? How big is your office? This, that. And at one point we had a big office. We had like 6 people. And that was how our success was defined, by how many people you had. We probably have the smallest staff we have now. We don't have as many websites. We don't have a site for kids and teens. It just wasn't profitable. And we've come to a small group, but we're doing more. And I said, it's kind of interesting to see you pare back and you have more time, but this would not be a sign of success. Like working from home 3 years ago would have been, oh, you don't have an office in the city. It's interesting to see how things get redefined. They really, really do.
Well, and hopefully we're redefining them ourselves, because my question of not how big is your office or how big is this is are you happy? Do you feel joy? Do you feel peace? Are you exhausted all the time, or are you taking care of your mental, emotional, physical well-being? Like I said, it took me many years to prioritize those things in my own life, but kind of once you do, you can't ever go back. You're like, oh, now I get it, right? So I hope that we all can define our own success and our own happiness for ourselves,
Yeah. And it's what you take joy in. People say, what do you enjoy? I say, I do enjoy what I do working, because when I was little, I loved to read. And now I read, for a living, besides building websites for authors and these other things we do. So you've got this other powerful character who's so different from Victoria. We've got Zelda. And she is this woman who's really going to help her in a lot of ways. She's going to help Victoria. She's going to help Victoria to a very big end by just keeping it pushing that direction. But she's so different. She's the woman who's, married to the guy who's really successful, and it is a business kind of way, not a rancher kind of a way. So tell us about Zelda and how she had to kind of be there to help her out.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you that I love Zelda also, but I mentioned I did many revisions of this story. Structurally, it was actually very challenging for me to write, because I had to work in Inga's narrative and sort of that whole story. And previously, I weighted her a little heavier till I figured out, wow, this is really Victoria's story. Whatever I tell about these other characters all have to be in service to Victoria's story. Narratively, that took me a little while to flesh out and to understand. And so of my many revisions, when I was restructuring things, Zelda actually did not exist until the final draft, the final revision. I mean, literally like maybe a year ago. I put Zelda in, well, a year and a half ago. But I'm so grateful I did. I previously had a character in there that was sort of a similar role as Zelda, but she just wasn't working for me. And once I hit on Zelda as sort of this one foot in both worlds in a way, like she was raised in the North Fork Valley. She's, she's part of that farmer culture. Her family's all up and down that valley. She has that sense of place, but she is stepping into the 1960s. She's ready to be a modern woman. She pays attention to what's going on in the news. Very, very different from Victoria. Yet she's actually the first friend, the first human friend, other than the trees, that Victoria ever has. And in that way, she's sort of symbolic of Victoria's turning toward humans, away from only finding comfort in the natural world and turning toward humans, because Victoria is a very solitary character. But thank goodness she finds Zelda, and that Zelda has this spark and this confidence and this wisdom around not feeling guilty or beating yourself up about your history and the grief and loss that you carry. She's like, whatever is going on with you, when you're ready to tell me, let me know. But I can tell you it's not your fault, and somebody needed to be around to tell Victoria that. Ultimately, Victoria makes all of her own decisions, and I thought that was very, very important. But Zelda comes along to kind of it's a little bit of a catalyst in that direction.
Make sure she really gets to Durango. Make sure you really get there. Make sure you really don't turn around on the way. Let's not have you turn around the way, because you could do that. And like I said, we're leaving out that storyline, but it forms the backbone of the story. It's about the loss of family, town, and roots. And I felt like you always knew it was going to wrap in that way, because you've got to go through the loss to end up on the other side. And I confess to doing a lot of crying at the end. I mean, the joyful part, I was crying. I was a mess of emotional tears in a good way. I looked inside, my husband goes, "What's the matter?" And I was like, "Oh, this book is so beautiful. I can't wait to talk to her." And he's like, "And you're sitting here crying?" I go, "Oh, you can't imagine. It takes place out in Colorado." And he's like, "Oh, that's all I needed to hear." Falling mess coming out. I just couldn't wait to do that. So I confess that it was like, I think that the loss had to be so profound to get people to the other way. And her loss on so many different levels, loss of big things in her life, and all the roots of her home are completely gone with what she knows she's been making as a direction. I thought that was, it's such a feeling of that weaves its way through the book, but you see her emerging from loss towards the end as well.
Yeah, because like I said, loss and grief is an unescapable part of everyone's life, So I wanted her to feel it, to feel the alienation of it, the depth of it, but also I wanted in some authentic way to turn the narrative toward hope. Not in a candied way, but in an authentic way where hope doesn't come easily, but it can be found, and it comes in small, subtle ways. The narrative overall, I love that people have that emotional reaction. Thank you so much for telling me that, because I hear that a lot from people. And honestly, as a writer, if you had to ask, why do I do this? First of all, I'd be like, I don't know. Anything about the creative spirit. If you paint a picture or write a song or tell a story, write a story, the creative impulse to me is a very mysterious and beautiful thing. I don't know what compels me, but in terms, and has always compelled me since I was a child, but in terms of what I would hope a reader might get out of something that I would write, there are layers of what I hope that someone might walk away from with this book, a closer attention to the natural world, a broader perspective around prejudice and the pain that it causes, value of family and ancestry, all these things. But if in the end, all I'm able to do is really reach into somebody's heart and make them feel deeply enough to either have a tear or a little, thump, thump, thump because of the beauty of the writing or of the experiences of the characters, then that actually means the world to me, because I believe in locating most of our life in that deep place. And so I really, really value that readers are having that emotional reaction to this story.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Really, really. Because I remember they wrote in the cover letter, and I cried, and I sat there and go, "How are you crying?" And then I got towards the end, I go, "Oh, now I get it. Now I totally get the point where everybody cried."
Yeah, I get that a lot. But again, yay, I love it. And men too. I'm encouraging. I hope more and more men read this book. I think that for whatever reason, most of the readership so far are women, but the men in my life who have read this book, they sob and they love it. And I have voice messages from cousins and uncles and friends like, Shelley, I just finished your book. I love it. I just had the most wonderful story that I'd love to share with you. You know, you mentioned I had my big launch event here at the Crested Butte Center for the Arts on Monday night. And oh my gosh, my whole beautiful community showed up. I mean, gosh, it was just magical. So grateful. But that day or a couple days prior, my one of the young women who works at the bookshop downtown at Townie Books, my favorite, most beloved bookshop, sent me an email that an older gentleman, a tourist, someone from out of town, I can't remember where he's from, came into the shop and said, hey, my whole family's skiing. I need a really great book. And they said, oh, you need to read Go as a River. And he took the book and he plopped himself down on their couch there in the bookshop. And he sat there and read it all day until he finished it. And he was crying at the end.
I love this.
And oh my gosh, this older gentleman, such a lovely man. He came to my book release event on Monday evening. You know, he was just he doesn't live here. He's just passing through, but he came because he wanted to meet me. And I just held his hand and looked him in the eye. And he said that he has been a member of a book club for 40 years with the same group of men, all men.
Wow.
And that they're going to read my book. And I was like, his name is John. I was like, thank you so much for that, because A, just that emotional reaction means the world. And then B, putting it in more men's hands, more diverse hands, actually really means a lot to me, because I think there's something for everyone to love in this book.
Well, my son's godfather, very close friend of ours, Bob Nouse, who's like umpteen generation Coloradan. I wrote him and I said, you have to do this, read this book. I said, and then you have to go to her event at the Howard cover, and you have to go. And he turns around and he goes, all right. And he sends me the link to the event. And I go, yes, that's the event. That's what I want you to go to. And I want you to spread the word. And I said, I've got to write my friends up in Vail. And it's just really fun because I think they know the place so well because they've all lived out there. And he said that part of the world he really loves. I think they've got a cabin out by that point, you know, the area. So the other thing we're going to talk about is peaches. And the peach trees on the land that are owned by Victoria's families have been cultivated for decades. Now, when I think of peaches, I think of Georgia. And I confess that there's the Georgia peach truck that comes up and they bring the peaches up twice a year. And I'm like always buying like, yeah, I'm like ridiculous. The other day I had them ship me peach
so good. I love that.
Yeah, peach salsa. Yeah, just to get the Georgia peaches. But I never thought of them in Colorado. And they are grown there. I mean, I went and did some research about they're grown up in the high ground and da 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 da. So tell me, like what drew you to do peaches? You're also on the cover, everybody. Like peaches. What drew you to put that as part of the story?
That's so good.
I love it.
Well, it's funny, you know, several people have told me that about peaches. When I think of peaches, I think of Georgia. I never think of Colorado, which shows my ignorance as just a deeply generational Colorado kid, because I was like, what? How? I had no idea that the whole world didn't know that the best peaches, sorry, Georgians, but the best peaches are grown in Colorado. I had no idea that that was a mystery or anomaly to anybody. So it's been really fascinating to me to find that out. But the western slope of the Colorado Rockies, Paonia, the North Fork River Valley, which features prominently in the book, and then also the Grand Valley around Grand Junction and Palisade, absolutely famous for their peaches. And part of the reason is that huge temperature differentiation that we have in Colorado all throughout the summer, where it can be warm during the day, but it's always cool at night. We're always wearing our down jackets at night. It makes for wonderful sleeping, I should say. And so it's the warm days and the cool nights. So unique kind of an ecosystem phenomenon here on the western slope that make for the sweetest peaches, and they get sweeter and sweeter as the season goes on because the nights get colder and colder. So the other thing about a Colorado peach and how it kind of plays into the book as a metaphor is that they're also incredibly difficult to grow in Colorado, because everything about a peach is very sensitive. The blossoms are incredibly sensitive. They're very susceptible to frost. And as we were saying earlier, the whimsy of weather in Colorado, it can snow in the middle of July. it can certainly frost unexpectedly well into the spring. And if that happens, you lose the entire crop. And so growing peaches and making them extend all the way into the fall is a deeply skilled endeavor. And so a lot of our peach farmers are ancestral peach farmers who have learned how to do it generationally. I love that so much. I love the care and the precision, the love of the land, the love of the trees that goes into that. And so the peach orchard in the beginning of the book in Iola, I will admit that I took a little creative license there. In terms of the Gunnison Valley where Iola once stood, there's no evidence that there had ever been an actual orchard there. When I describe it, I say, it's the only peach orchard in all of Gunnison County. And there's no evidence necessarily that there was a peach orchard, but I knew I was going to eventually move the story to real peach country over in Paonia. And in order to do that, and to speak about peaches are intelligently at all, I had to do a ton of research, mostly by interviewing peach farmers. And one of the things I would always ask them was, like, hypothetically speaking, would it be possible to have a peach orchard at the elevation and the conditions of what was Iola? And they all said possible, yes. And so, the ability to grow against all odds, the resilience and new point of keeping a family together, all of these things end up being oriented around the peaches as the narrative continues. They really are the only sacred thing in Victoria's family, and the peaches truly root her to something meaningful and something consistent in her life.
And
So
something that
I loved that Spiegel. Oh no, go ahead.
I said
I love that Spiegel and Grau chose a peach for the.
It's like so perfect.
I love that Spiegel and Grau. Yeah, because with the title, I assumed there would be a river on the cover, which is true for the UK cover, has a river on the cover. I think that's what I anticipated. But I think for my editor, Cindy Spiegel, and the people at Spiegel and Grau, the peaches became so poignant and so important to them in the narrative to put it on the cover. I love that. I'm so grateful for that, because it even brings more attention to the power of the peach orchard throughout the
and I learned the book. I learned that the cold nights bring the sweetest, and then too cold means too much. And I think that's so much a metaphor of her world. Slim decisions for her make the difference between right and wrong and living and dying. And I felt like it's like the peach could go bad, her life could go bad. Something could be on this way. At any moment, something can go wrong. But it's really funny that you go out and meet these peach farmers and nobody mentions, well, the difference between us and the Georgia peach. Nobody talks about it. See, nobody talks about it.
No, they don't. I mean, we're all about Colorado peaches here, so that never even came up. Isn't that funny?
I've got to send you some this summer. I'm going to send you some Georgia peaches, because they actually come up with this truck. And it was a big thing during the pandemic, was getting refrigerated trucks. And one of the companies, there are two companies that kind of rival each other. One of the trucks didn't make it last year because they couldn't get enough refrigerated trucks and canceled everybody's order. So we were luckily on the truck that was already coming. So this big thing of they come up and they go to different landscaping places, or like the outside of some store, and you just go in the parking lot and say your name and get your peaches. It's very funny.
Oh wow.
And then
I carried on the idea that they're a little jewel, like you all that trouble to get them. I hope we all value peaches a little bit more after reading this book, because they really are unlikely in any climate, and they really are just such a jewel. And I'm sure the Georgia peaches are fabulous.
We also have the Jersey peaches, and there's a farm where by us, so we can go out and pick your own. They're peaches. Now I want to go up and really talk to those people, which I'm just going to. But after reading this book, they're just be like, "Oh, great! Everybody who's read this book is going to show up there and go, now I've got some questions for you. Cold nights for the peaches." I could just feel the conversations coming up at this farm. I think I should send them a copy of the book and say, "Okay, read this. People are going to come in this summer asking you about this book." I think I might do that.
Yeah, so, that's great.
And then we've got this flooding of the town in the 1960s, and they're closing down to build the Blue Mesa Dam and Reservoir, and it was filled. And it's hard to think about all these towns disappearing. And then, do you recall family members talking about like these towns being evacuated of people or were you too young for that to happen at that point? Because I know you're young.
I was too young, and actually it's kind of interesting to me. The valley was flooded and Blue Mesa Reservoir was created the year that I was born. So that's kind of fascinating serendipity to me. I don't have a lot of personal experience, or my people don't have a lot of personal experience with that era. I mean, that's right when my family came to the Gunnison Valley, was right then, 65, 66. And so, what I've mostly learned about it is we have these amazing local historians who really are the story keepers of the valley, and they write prolifically. And like I said, there are still people who live here in the valley who were evacuated from Iola. And so those stories have been recorded for our community. We have a couple really fabulous museums. And so I did that research primarily by talking to ranchers, talking to people who experienced it, as well as our local historians. And there was a lot to unpack there, because the process was long. When something like that happens, it was flooded in 1965 and 66, but it obviously the preparation for that flooding happened for years and years. Up until that time. I think I have Victoria leave in 1958. So it had already started happening by then. And so this slow erasure of a town, towns actually, it's Cibola, Saponaro, and Iola. Iola was the largest and the one that has the most beautiful, I think it has a beautiful name, but the Iola is the one that captured my imagination a little bit more. One of them, Saponaro, a few of the buildings were relocated up on a hill, and it sort of still exists in a way. It's just sort of a few buildings, but Cibola and Saponaro and Iola were completely dismantled and flooded and gone, just erased. Yeah.
Well, I did some quick research and I saw that the drought in the reservoir has led that some of Iola has actually been uncovered. And it's like people can walk. I don't know if people can walk through there again. That's my question. And have you done that? Because they said you can still see where the school was. You can still see where certain things were in town. And it's terrible that it had to be a drought that would make this to happen. But can you imagine being in the town, like you left that town and it's uncovered now and you can see like where things were? Have you been there? Have you been down there?
I have. So it's only happened twice. With the drought in the West, it's kind of a combination of, we haven't had as much drought here in Gunnison Valley, but the Colorado River Compact, there's a lot of very complicated water laws in the Western United States. So much of the history of the Western United States is oriented around water, and water, how to bring water to the arid regions of the American West, was why Blue Mesa Reservoir was created in the first place. It wasn't that we needed the water here in the valley. We have an abundance of water here in Gunnison Valley. It was created to support Lake Powell, actually. And so as Lake Powell has dried up, as everybody knows, over this drought over the last several years, they can do what's called a water call and basically drain as much from Blue Mesa Reservoir. There's Flaming Gorge Reservoir. There's three who have this legal obligation to funnel water to other places when there's a drought. And so several years, 3 years ago, I want to say, we had a water call on Blue Mesa Reservoir that drained it so low that it was the first time that Iola had come out since it was flooded in the 60s. And I went down there and you can see the old flagpole, the base for the old flagpole, some of the foundations of where the school was. And I know a lot of the old photographs from Iola because I've been studying it for years. This novel has taken me many years to write. And I could just envision it, and the novel opens with Victoria talking about the smell of the breakfast and the hustle and bustle in the town every morning. I could just see it, and the fact that it had literally just been all erased was really painful. And then this past summer, because of the drought and the situation at Lake Powell, it came out again. It was much muddier this time and harder to visit. We'll see how it plays out in the future. We have had an abundance of snow. If you can see my windows
here,
all the way up to we've had an abundance of snow. Maybe it won't happen again for a while, but it was a profoundly shocking lesson for all of us in the Gunnison Valley who consider the water and the lake that is Blue Mesa Reservoir our own. It's where we all swim and fish and boat and ice skate in the winter. And suddenly the water was just gone, and it was this muddy pit. And that was so outlandish. It was so outside of our expectations or reality structure. I think it was a really shocking introduction to how water politics and water scarcity is really going to define the 21st century. Something we all are going to have to face up to, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I've got bottles because somebody said, when you pour the water in the bath, you could take the cold water and water the flowers later. I was like, oh, that's such a great idea. And I've got all these bottles lined up.
I love that.
It's like, oh yeah, that's something to do.
Yeah, that'd be more conservation minded, like my grandmother's generation was so conservation minded about everything. And I think we're very wasteful. And the repercussions of that are profound, far more than I think most people want to admit.
And it's also when people come like from a town, which is unto itself, Crested Butte is a very different place than most places I've been. And then outsiders come in and it's like, do you protect our place the same way? And you feel like every town is, this is the way it was. Are we going to keep this the same? What's going to change? How's it going to be different? And I think that's like a big thing.
Yeah, well, as we talked about earlier, change is inevitable. So for me, and being in the Gunnison Valley for so long, the Gunnison Valley is, it's huge. It's I can't remember, it says like the size of the state of Rhode Island. It's an enormous county, and it's 90% public lands, which is glorious. It's BLM land, national forest land, wilderness area, endless hiking, and endless wild places. And it's a place that needs to be cared for. So it's not so much about an outsider coming in, it's about the spirit of a place. I think that this valley has a unique and beautiful spirit, and anyone who comes in and acknowledges and values that spirit then carries forward that spirit. Anybody who comes in and wants to make it like the place they left, then that spirit gets diluted. And so I think, like everything in life, it's about respect. It's about respect and reverence, and to not trying to make every place the same, to hold on to the unique qualities of rural places. Each rural area has its own story, and I love those stories, and I want those communities to be able to hold on to those stories and hold on to that identity.
Yeah, and I think it's something that could be lost really quickly. Like our town, even it's been a lot of gentrification. There's a lot was what's going on, and it's also a lot being called by the state right now for affordable housing, which I will not even get into because I think it's like the craziest thing I've ever seen. But it's changed the complexion of a town. It can change the complexion of a town really quickly, and it's by outside rule of this is the way it's going to be. Even like Iola, you're not going to be here anymore. It's very interesting to see even back then what ended up happening to a whole community, a whole town. So
yeah, it's layers of complexity. And as a professor, when I teach, when I bring ideas to students, what I always try to help them understand is we do ourselves and the world no service when we take very complex ideas, complex situations, and reduce them down to simplicity just for the sake of a soundbite or a conversation. Complex situations need to be dealt with complexly, and there's always layers and layers in these forces of change, and a lot of players and a lot of people who suffer. And I think that we do our communities a tremendous service if people of varying viewpoints can come to the table, deal with complex issues complexly and respectfully. And a lot of these problems, I think, can be solved.
Sit down and just say at the table. I've been watching Murder in Bighorn on Showtime, and we talk about prejudice across the country, but there's still a line between tribal Indians and others. I mean, and we don't talk about it that much because it's not an East Coast, West Coast thing. It's a more middle of the country kind of a thing. And I find that watching this show, I was thinking about Will coming into town. I was thinking about these girls who have disappeared, and their disappearance was not weighed as much as a white woman who has disappeared. And I just found weighing that story against reading this about your town, was just so interesting to see, because I saw it in that story, but also in real life of what's going on right now.
The legacy of physical and cultural genocide against the indigenous people is, it's a deeply American story, and it's a deeply American wound. And I've always felt such an incredible reverence and respect for indigenous cultures, and there are many different cultures. We can't speak of them as one lump. Part of regaining respect and acknowledgement of Indigenous populations is to return to them just the ability to leave their identity and their way of life and their choices to them, and to just step into those spaces with as much cultural sensitivity, as much humility, as much respect as possible. I think it's always a challenge for a writer to know narratively where our voices belong and don't belong. It's actually a pretty vibrant conversation in the literary community right now, the idea of who has the right to tell whose story. And it's a complicated, layered, nuanced conversation that I would not dare to simplify. But I can say that for me, I'm a deep believer in the creative spirit, in the breadth of the creative spirit. We have a long history in the literary world of someone going into a creative space and telling a story about somebody who is not like him or herself or whatever. I mean, so many of the great works of literature would not have been written if we were limited to only writing about people who looked and came from backgrounds exactly like our own. So we need to have the creative license to delve into other people's lives and situations. But at the same time, so much of those narratives have spoken for people instead of allowing them to speak for themselves. And there's been a tremendous amount of cultural appropriation, cultural disrespect. And so now we find ourselves at this moment where we each have to step into that space as creatives and make our own choices around that. But I think for me, telling Will's story, I felt that I knew where I could go with it and where I should go with it, and also where I should not. Feeling very profoundly that his story was not mine to tell in its entirety, but also knowing it would be disrespectful to leave that narrative out. I think it's all about intention and trying to step into those narratives with the best of intentions. But as you say, race relations in the United States are so complex and so layered. I think every single one of us can do is try to show up to the conversation and be as kind and as gentle and open-hearted and open-minded as we possibly can.
And you know what? It's like me, I grew up with an Italian background. There was a time for your Italian, it was you were here and there. And it was the prejudice against that. There's prejudice against Irish. There's been prejudice through the years. And what we have not learned at this point is very, very interesting to look at,
Yeah, it is. It's painful. It is.
So
it's very painful.
You're this 5th generation Coloradan. So I'm doing some math. Okay, I went and did some this morning. If everybody came and everybody had a baby when they were 20, like we just went back to that. It came the mid 1800s. Am I right? Is it the mid 1800s?
Yeah.
Your family came to Colorado?
Yep, that's right.
And where they come from?
Right. That's right.
Where would they come from? Where was their
well, so it's my mother's side that's the 5th generation Coloradoan. And so, several of them, great grandparents, came, and they came from various places. They came from Missouri, they came from North Carolina, they came from my dad's side. My grandmother came from Oklahoma. They came from the East, and then also the Midwest. I know my great grandfather, I think it's great, worked on the Erie Canal, hauling steamships with horses. They're pulling steamships through the Erie Canal before he came to Colorado. But his story was that he had a wife and 5 children before he came to Homestead in Colorado, and they all died. They all died of a flu, I don't think the flu, but a flu. And and then my great grandmother, her family homesteaded in northeastern Colorado in a sod house. They literally dug, and this was mid 1800s, before Colorado was actually a state, dug into the hillside and created a home. And that's where she actually lived with her mother and her brothers throughout most of her young life. My great grandfather actually died out there on the Eastern Plains, doing some sort of manual labor, chopping wood or tending to the cattle. I don't know. And then so the women had to run area, and it was wild and it was remote, and I think that's fascinating and tough. Oh my gosh, so tough. And then the rest of my family, southeastern Colorado, they were farmers and ranchers in southeastern Colorado. My grandfather was an amazing storyteller, and he very much valued that heritage, and so I heard those stories all my life. And then as he got older and his memory started fading, we bought him a typewriter and he typed it all out. So one of my most valuable resources through all of this writing was my grandfather's memoirs and what it was like to live on that ranch out in southeastern Colorado. So pretty cool.
Yeah. My next question was, what you could tell us about them? And you told us a lot, and that really, it did influence you. It's influenced your whole life. It's influenced your writing, you know?
Oh yeah. It has, although I was telling my brother yesterday that or the other night at the release event, that so much is now focused doing these types of interviews, talking with people about my book. Suddenly people are like, wow, you're a fifth generation Coloradan. And I think, yeah, I value it deeply, but I've never brought this much focus and attention to it. It's just sort of always been who we are. Up until now. And now that I'm having to put a more sort of aware and critical lens on it and really talk about it, I think, wow, that is amazingly cool. I've felt it in my bones. I've felt it in myself. I also know those tough women and those ancestors. I have some of that toughness in me. But suddenly to be really aware of how special it is to be rooted for 5 generations in a place, I'm loving that. It's really, yeah.
It is. It's like, this is the place, this is what I call home, and I can explain it to you. And I can explain it to you through a number of generations of why it means something. You know, my husband and I, like millions of others, are watching Yellowstone in 1883 and 1983. And they're giving us a sense of the history of the West by watching one family moving through. And as much as if it's glorified or whatever, it still is showing you the pain of coming quest. You just thought coming was the Indians were the people that you had to, like, you know, worry about. No, it wasn't. It was the robbers. It was all these other people along the way. And I thought about so much, like moving the cattle. Never really thought about this. I always joke that my favorite thing about the show is, let's get the chopper. It's too far to ride into town. And I said, I want to be someplace where I have to say, get the chopper. It's too far to ride into town. But I feel like watching that show, even, and though the people in Montana like hate it because everybody goes there and thinks it's like that, I think it's given us some idea. And I think the reason people gravitated towards it is they want to know these stories that are not just shoot them up at the old corral, but the fight for the land, the fighting for, like, exactly what it means to be a rancher. Because you don't really know about moving the cows, and the grass isn't going to be good, and it's diseased, and you got to send them here, and what it's going to cost, stuff. And am I crazy to sit there and say it's given people a little bit more appreciation about the land and what it does? You know?
I don't know. I'm thrilled to hear that. I don't really watch much television, not in an arrogant sort of way. I just would rather read or write, whatever. So I actually have heard a little bit about those shows, but I've never actually seen them. But what I gather is that it is a draw. You know, Westerns were very, very popular, sort of my mom and dad's era. My dad talks about being able to go in downtown Colorado Springs and when he was a little kid and pay a dime and go see a Western at the Peak Theater in downtown Colorado Springs. I think that's always been part of our frontier imagination. We consider ourselves very much a frontier nation. You know, the frontier was officially closed in the United States in 1890. I always joke with my students, like, it was like officially closed. Like, we hung up a sign that said, I'm sorry, we're closed. But the frontier mentality of the American West so defined the American West with a lot of really dangerous mythologies around manifest destiny and all sorts of things that played out really horrifically. But it also was responsible for the development of the West. And so, again, very complex. But I think there's always been a romantic notion around what that was like and who was tough enough to go do that. And, you know, when I think about my own ancestors, honestly, and right up to my grandparents, who I knew very, very well, and my mom and dad, is grit. Grit is the word that comes to mind. These were people who work hard, step into any situation, figure out a way to get by, to make it work. just extraordinary amount of grit. And I've grown up with that my whole life. And also I'm surrounded by that here in the Gunnison Valley. It can be 20, 30 below zero, and you're out, you'll see the ranchers out there on their horses feeding the cattle. It's just a way of being that I hope inspires people. I don't know what's drawing people to suddenly those types of kind of Western oriented shows are so popular, but I'm glad for it, because I think it's something to value and respect. But also, as you say, we have hopefully culturally gone well past the old narrative of the American West, and we're stepping into a new narrative of the American West that can tell all of the stories in all of their complexity. There's actually a whole center. It's called the Center for the New American West at the University of Colorado, and they've done amazing work for decades now, trying to cut through the mythologies and trying to expose the ironies and the prejudices, and to say the West is a really complex place, and let's try to understand it better.
Yeah.
I love it, and I love all of its nuances. I can't imagine myself living anywhere else. And I hope that, Victoria's story and getting to know some of the characters, some of the stoic but strong characters in this book, help people to understand a little bit better about who we are.
Who we are and what we're doing. So you've written stories, magazine pieces for years. This is your first book, and you're in your 50s, as you've said. Was this a project you stopped and started? It was, I'm always going to write a book. I don't have time to write a book. I'm a professor. I'm doing this. How did this end up happening?
Yeah, how did this end up happening? I asked myself that a lot, actually. I always wrote all through my childhood, through college and graduate school. I was destined to be a writer. That's where I was going. I have a master's degree from the Temple University graduate program in creative writing. That's my undergraduate degrees were in journalism and creative writing and literature. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. And yet, when I was in grad school, I had a teaching fellowship, which helped pay for school, thank goodness. And I found out I actually really love teaching also. And the reality of that is that teaching was a sure paycheck.
Yeah.
I gratefully got hired here at Western Colorado University, fresh out of grad school in the early 90s. And this is my homeland. I wanted more than anything in the world to come back to Gunnison County, and I was able to do that. And so I knew I had a good thing. I also adored my students and really felt like I could make a positive difference in the world by working with young people, developing their critical thinking skills. And so, time is a strange thing, because all of those years did go by where I wrote short fiction. I wrote for magazines, primarily for the Crusty Butte magazine. I wrote because I'm just drawn to it and I like to do it, but it was an aside for me. And I had a very hard time clearing any space for it in a real way. And so once this story started evolving in me, I definitely did not give it the time and attention that it deserved. It really had to shout at me, honestly, for me to get to pay attention to it. Almost in a strange way, like I stopped valuing that part of myself. It was about time. It was about teaching full time and being a mom. And I think there are so many people who are listening to this who can understand that, being a working parent, sometimes, and then of course the challenges that life throws you outside of those two contexts of work and parenting. Life is complicated, and there are only so many hours in the day. And I think that probably a lot of people can understand that there might be a variety of things you would love to do for your own development, for your own happiness, for your own creative self, or just anything that you love that gets put to the bottom of the list because you're just keeping everything moving and keeping everybody happy and keeping everyone alive, honestly. And so I think it's very, very easy for anyone, especially a woman or mom, to put something as meaningful as the desire to finish a book that needs to be written at the bottom of your priority list. At some point, I started shifting, and I started saying, no more. I need to finish this book. Stories matter. This story matters. My creative spirit matters. And I started little by little carving a little bit more space for it. It helped that my children were getting older and a little bit more independent. But it took me years to give myself that permission. I eventually took early retirement from teaching in 2018, specifically to finish the final draft of this book, to find an agent, work with an agent, and to get it out in the world. And it was a very scary thing to do. You know, I think we love to tell people like, make the leap, but that is financially terrifying when you're walking away from a sure paycheck into something that's unknown. I had one child in college and another on the way. My husband's a flight paramedic and a search and rescue guy. He's out saving the world all the time, especially through the pandemic, bless him. And, you know, he was like, 2018, when I really felt like I needed to be done teaching, he was like, I'll pick up extra shifts. We'll make it work. I then picked up little extra jobs and stuff because it was necessary. But it was also an absolutely necessary leap for me to make, to actually finish this book. And I'm so dang glad I did. I'm so glad I did. If this was still languishing on my laptop somewhere, I'd be so sad. So I really do encourage people, to the degree that they are able, is to make that leap and honor your creative spirit, especially if you're a writer or a creative in some way. It matters, you know, it matters. And it's also why I'm thrilled out of my mind that it's been so well received.
Yes. 30 countries. 30 countries the last time I heard. 30 countries.
I mean, what?
Here's the thing. Do you think that as a younger woman, you could have written this book the same way? Do you feel you need it? See, and that's the whole thing. I was talking to William Kent Kruger yesterday, who was really published for the first time in his 40s. Okay. And we talked about it. He said there's some great writers in their 20s. I said, but for your work, which is so character driven, like your work is so character driven, do you feel like you just couldn't have done this 20 years ago? You could not have written this without knowing a lot of things that came together. And there are a number of people that have come to writing that I know in later years, and they're writing the first book. And the first book, look at Lessons in Chemistry, it was Bonnie Garmus's first book. You know, she's got a brilliant book on the front of your book. You know, it's very, very interesting that it's a time where you may not have been able to do it sooner. And I just feel that very, very strongly. It's like, could you tell the same story? No. So it was time you had to wait.
There is no question. You saw that I answered that question immediately. No, I have the wisdom that I have gained through my own journey, the way in which I have become myself in a similar way that Victoria had to become herself by facing challenges, stepping up to what was required of her, gave me the depth and the wisdom to be able to tell this story. It's absolutely not a story that I could have told when I was younger. And so I am deeply grateful for the process, every minute of it. I really am.
So at one point, Will says, I will go as a river. My grandfather told me that's the only way. And it came up again later in the book, because I pay attention to things like that. Those are on some of the folded down pages in the galley. Okay. And was Go as a River always the title? Was that always going to be the title of the book? Or did you come up with that along the way?
Yeah, no, titles are so hard for me. I don't know why. Even when I write a magazine article, titles are hard. They have to do so much heavy lifting, you know. I played with several different titles for this book, and it was very challenging. But once this one came up for me, and I can talk about where it comes from. Once this one came up for me, I was like, spot on. That's exactly it. And then I went back in and put in when Will says it. And then later when Victoria says, you know, Will had told me to go as a river, but it's only now that I really understand what that means. It becomes the central trajectory of the entire book, of her sort of lived experience, helping her understand what he meant by that. He was a very wise young man. He understood that, but she had to learn it. And so I'm so grateful I finally hit on the right one. I didn't know what the title should be, but I knew when I was playing with these others that they were not right.
Not the right title. I know it's not the right thing, but I don't know what the right thing is going to be. And she says it. She also says it when I'm spacing her name right now, was dying. She says, "Go like a river," and it's like that moment too. And I have that page folded down as well. So. Okay, so we talked about this cover. This got this beautiful peach on the front cover. And I take it different countries have done different things with their covers. They've done different things with their covers, correct? Yes.
Yeah, they're just beginning to choose, because the United States and Canada published yesterday on February 28th. And now it's sort of boom, 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 all these 30 whatever countries. I literally lost track. They will now be publishing. I think the UK is next in early April. And then so the United States cover, the UK cover, and Canada are all different, and they're all beautiful. They all are different cultural interpretations of what matters most in the book. That's what I found most fascinating. My brilliant international agent, Susanna Lee, helps me manage all of this with the foreign countries and all the foreign publishing houses. And she tells me that from here forward, all of the different countries can either choose the United States cover, the Canadian cover, the UK cover, or they can choose their own, but they have to run it by me and her.
That's great.
I was like, cool. But also what I've learned with these covers is they're very culturally defined, that what might be really attractive in one culture is not actually attractive in another. So we'll see. It'll be absolutely fascinating to find out over these 30 some countries what all the different covers look like. I can't wait. I know Germany is going to use the same cover as the UK with the river on the cover. And I know Finland has chosen the cover that Canada is using. So far,
frame them in the house. You should frame them in your office, your house, someplace, and also put them up on your website, because it was on your website, and put the international covers as time goes on, so everybody can see the differences and stuff like that. Because I think it's, I think it's a book that I would recommend talking to my book group to talk about, because I think it's a book that you can have a much layered discussion about women, the times, all these things as well. The audio is narrated by Cynthia Farrell. And did you have a chance to, did you audition who you wanted to have as talent for that, or did they pick?
Yeah, they picked for me. They narrowed it down to 2, and then I had a choice between the 2, and it's a difficult thing, because Victoria's voice is so in my mind. I don't know that any narration was going to be exactly what I wanted it to be, but it's very interesting, the publishing process of where a writer does participate and where a writer doesn't, because publishing process is long, first of all, and there are very different areas of expertise that have to come in, layers and layers of different areas of expertise. So I'm a writer, I understand narrative, I understand books, but I don't know how books get in the world. I'm learning. But the number of people that I would say, it takes a village to raise a child, but it absolutely also takes a village to publish a book. And so it's been a great learning experience to me, of all the different areas of expertise that have to come together to make all the decisions about a book, to make the decisions about publicity and audio and all of these things. And I've participated to the degree that I felt that I was helpful. And then I had to get very good at kind of handing over the stuff that was outside of my area of expertise. Yeah, and that's okay.
I can back off now. I can back off at this point. I can move back on this point. You make the decision. It's okay.
Yeah. There's definitely some of that, and a lot of letting go of your baby. My novel was my own private endeavor for many, many years. I'm a very solitary writer. It was my own private gem for a really long time. So putting it out in the world has been both glorious and a little scary, but mostly glorious.
It's been a great reception with 30 countries. When I remember going to pre-event with you months ago, and it was already there, and I was like, "Whoa, this is a book." It was before the holidays. This is a book to pay attention to.
Yeah,
film rights have been bought by the film production company Mazer Kaplan, who is the main business their main business is bringing books to film, and they're concentrating those efforts on the adaptations they love. Now, I know Paula and Mitch, who are the people behind Mazer Kaplan, and when they first starting out, they came to my office and they explained to me, like we were talking about, would such and such a book work? And they're like, no, that would be a big budget. That needs big sex. That needs big this, big that. And as a result, it's tough to do. And then this one, I don't know if the story is big enough. And we sat for about an hour and a half in my office, and I got this education about books to screen, about what would work. So when I heard they bought this, I felt like, oh, yes, I completely see everything we talked about that day in my office, because it's a set place. She goes to another place, she comes back to a place, moves to another, but it's not like building a World War II set. It's not like we have to go they're not large groups of people that we need for most of the scenes in the book. They're
No,
people.
no. In fact, the opposite challenge,
opposite.
honestly. So I just recently met with Mitch and Paula, two extraordinary humans. Oh my gosh, I love them both so much. And they love this book. I feel like my story, Victoria's story, is in such good hands with them.
Mhm.
And but we talked a little bit. It's in the very early stages. So a lot of decisions and planning to be made. But we talked just a little bit about some of the, the novel is very cinematic in nature.
Mhm.
There's a lot of scenes that you can imagine up on the big screen. But I think what's going to prove to be tricky is Victoria is a fairly solitary character. A lot of the narrative, a lot of the unfolding of the story goes on in her first person narration.
Mhm.
She's also in the wilderness by herself for quite a bit of it. So talk about an area that is not my area of expertise, which is film. So I am absolutely fascinated and excited to see what they end up doing with it. And they have been very kind to invite me to participate on whatever level I desire. So it will be collaborative on some level, but I'm just starting to imagine it. I think it could be great. I'm very excited. Yeah.
I think it could be great. And I think the one thing you want to do is you want to get the chair on the set with your name on it so you could bring it on the set and da da da. And it's also going to see how people interpret the story. Like, do they add an extra character? Do they add somebody for her to talk to? Does there some sort of part of this have to be more elongated and other parts shortened so that we can see like what happens? And
I mean, a book this long, condensed into 2 hours, of a feature length film, which is what they're leaning toward. There's now, so much love for streaming and for what do they call limited series, right? That is still on the table. I guess it might allow Victoria's character to unfold more slowly and more thoroughly, but I think Mitch and Paula both would rather have it be a theater cinematic release. And so yeah, I don't know, but you saying that about a director's chair with my name on it, you have to understand this whole ride has been so unexpected, so crazy, so crazy for me. I like I said, I love my book. I worked really hard on it, but never in my wildest dreams would I have thought I would be sitting here talking to you, that you would be saying, well, what are the different covers in the different countries going to look like? What is the movie going to be? I mean, you have to know that sometimes I think I'm dreaming all of this. It's been a great honor, and I'm so grateful, but it's all a lot to even believe.
One of the reasons I really wanted to bring you to our readers, because when I met you in December, when you were just at the very early, pre-pub, I said the enthusiasm for your book was so, like you were there talking about it, but you also talked about it so authentically. And I felt like it was the book I wanted to go read. It took me longer to get to it than I wanted, but it was that one going, I want the peach. I want the peach. Just give me everything else, give me the peach. So know that, that kind of unbridled enthusiasm and people picking up the enthusiasm from there, they will take your mantle for you forward. And that is what you will see after Monday night's event. And as you go out on the road, you will see that your story becomes somebody else's story to take on. And it's no different than telling the story around the campfire. It's just this campfire going on.
Yeah, that's a nice way of thinking of it. It really is. There's only so many hours in the day. I've never done any kind of social media in the past. I just didn't have any space for it in my life. But, with some nudges by my publicists, I went ahead and got on Instagram. And I am so pleasantly surprised by the book community on Instagram. What lovely humans, what kind, gentle, supportive community it is around books. And the people who have read and loved my book, the radius of that web is growing. I've got to witness that, in a really organic way, just this beautiful enthusiasm for my book that spreads from one person to the other. So I'm really seeing that play out, what you're saying, of there will be other people carrying my story out into the world. And how surprising. I really didn't know. I never really thought ahead to what will this book look like in the world. I was just wanting to get the story right. Beyond that, I never thought ahead. I didn't ever think of, I don't know, it was just such an authentic experience writing the book. I wasn't writing it for any particular purpose. And so I guess all of this has been really beautiful and surprising to me.
And I think you're right. I don't spend enough time if my brain went to social media, it'd be easier. That act of putting up the picture, cropping the picture. Oh my gosh, so much work. I really need to have somebody behind me and go, could you just make this exactly the way I want it and do it like by clone?
I
Because
know.
all those things, and I'm like, oh my God, I've done all these interviews. I haven't posted one thing I've done. I haven't put one thing up. I haven't held up this book yesterday and go, I love this book like everybody else's. I'm looking at their pictures and loving them, but I'm not. But it's a whole other piece of work. It's a whole other side of what's going on. But to get that story to radiate even bigger, like what do you do? And we do it like, with our newsletters. This will appear in 3 different newsletters, things like that end up happening and propelling it forward. But it's this timing thing of making things work and keeping the story going too. So on that note, what's next for you? Because that once you do a book like that, that's fine. You only have about 20 minutes to write the next one. Not giving you a lot of time. And the big problem is when you're doing promotion for this one, you can't really do that one. And it can't be that far away, because the problem is I've had people say, I got to go out and talk about the paperback. What were the characters again? What did they do? Because it's not the first book, so
you have to be. Well, I'm glad you acknowledge that while you're doing publicity and whatnot for this book, you can't really be working on your second book. I especially the type of writer I am, and I've trying to work on not having to have like total solitude and silence and like 20 hours of peace. If I can only write under those circumstances, the next one's going to be as many years as this one took, so I'm trying to learn how to be a more consistent writer. But it is a pretty large mental leap for me to go from chipping away at this in my own little private endeavor. It was years and years before anyone on the planet other than my husband and my kids knew that I was even writing a novel. Now it's very public. I have a time frame. It's going to be a very, very different experience. I might even start from the beginning and like write in a linear way, which is, like I said, completely different process than how this book came together. I don't actually know how to do that because I've never done it before. But I learned so much about writing a novel by writing this one. I am such a better writer for the process. And I do have my wonderful editor, Cindy Spiegel at Spiegel and Grau, who I now have to bounce things off of. It will be less trial and error, less solitary endeavor. And Spiegel and Grau are already supporting my second novel. So I know that they will publish it once I finish it. And I'm actually super excited to get more into it in earnest. I was just getting into it when everything with this book started exploding, and I feel like I abandoned a child somewhere and I need to go get it and take care of it. It's still very character driven and very place driven, and I need the space and time to get to know those characters in that place, and then I think I'll be off. I think it'll be fun, actually.
Do you have to go to Europe at all for promotion? Do you have to go to Europe at all for doing promotion? There's that long plane ride, that long
I know.
Book yourself in one of those pods and right away. You know what I mean? Because it won't be an interruption. Just bring me food.
I love that you mentioned that, because my family teases me because I teach in Europe some, and my husband teaches in Europe some, and now with these publishing contracts, we do go, from time to time, and I love a long overseas flight. Give me 8, 10, 12 hours when nobody can get a hold of me. My phone's not going to bing. Nobody needs me. It is like this bubble of just leave me alone for 10 hours. I have always loved an international flight. So yes, I'll try to use that time productively.
No sleeping, Bill. You just go do that. Go do that.
Just right.
This has been such a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to speak. I'm so glad. It's a book that meant so much to me as I was reading it personally, and one that I want to hand sell to all of my friends. It's like, oh my gosh, this could be the one, guys, I'm talking about. Get ready. You know me. So thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure. And to our readers, look forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks To. Thank you for being a part of today.
Oh, thank you so much. And your enthusiasm and support has meant the world to me. So thank you so much.